I retired 8 months ago after 45 years at the same company, and I have not yet figured out who I am without it. And I want to tell you that plainly at the start, because the plain version is the honest version, and the honest version is the only one worth telling, which is something I have learned in the 8 months of the not knowing that I did not fully understand in the 45 years of the knowing. My name is Leonard. I'm 71 years old, and I spent 4.5 decades building an identity out of work that was genuine, and that was real, and that turned out. In the first morning I woke up without it, to be insufficient, as the sole answer to the question of who I am. And the insufficiency is what I want to talk to you about, not because I have resolved it. I have not resolved it, but because the living inside the not resolving has shown me things about the work and about the self and about what the 45 years were actually for that I could not have seen from inside them. I need to tell you about the work first, because the work is not the villain of this story, and I want to be clear about that from the beginning, because the story of the man who loses himself in the work and discovers at retirement that he has been living the wrong life is a story that exists. That is not my story, and the distinction matters to the accuracy of what I am trying to tell you. The work was real. It was genuinely mine, and genuinely important to me, and genuinely the place where some of the best of what I was capable of was expressed across 45 years. And the retiring from it was not the liberation from the wrong life, but the ending of the right one, or at least of the primary container of the right one. And the ending of the primary container is what I am inside of now, trying to understand what the contents of the right life look like when the container is no longer there to hold them. I grew up in a mid-sized city in Pennsylvania, the second son of a man who ran a small hardware store and a mother who worked part-time as a bookkeeper and who managed the household and the raising of 3 boys with the specific competence of a woman who had a great deal of ability and a limited arena in which to express it. The household was not poor and was not comfortable in the way that comfortable implies ease. Was the household of people who worked consistently and carefully, and who understood the relationship between the working and the having in the direct and unromantic way that people understand it when the relationship is not abstract, but daily and specific. My father worked 6 days a week for 30 years, and the hardware store was the primary fact of the family's life, the organizing principle around which the schedule and the budget and the daily texture of the household arranged themselves. And I absorbed the centrality of the work to the life, not as a lesson, but as the water, as the simple and unremarkable given of how a life is organized when it is organized around something real. I went to college on a partial scholarship, the first person in the family to do so, and studied accounting, which was a practical choice in the specific sense of a choice made by someone who has grown up around the concrete relationship between work and having, and who understands that the choice of work is also the choice of how the life will be structured and what it will contain and what it will not. I was good at it, genuinely good, and the goodness was not only the technical competence, but the specific quality of mind that accounting requires, and that I had, which is the quality of someone who finds satisfaction in the precision and the completeness of things that add up correctly, who gets from the balanced ledger a quality of order and resolution that is genuine rather than merely professional. I joined the company in 1979 when I was 26 years old, and the company was a mid-sized manufacturing firm in Ohio that made industrial components, and that required, among the many things that a manufacturing firm requires to function, people who were good with the numbers and with the systems that the numbers describe. And I was one of those people, and I was recognized as one of those people fairly early and given increasing responsibility fairly steadily across the years, not with the dramatic velocity of the exceptional career, but with the consistent and reliable progression of someone who is doing the work well and building, across the doing of it, the understanding of the operation that eventually becomes the thing that the operation most needs. I became the Chief Financial Officer in 2001, 22 years into the career, and the becoming was the capstone of the professional identity in the formal sense, the title that the 45 years of the building had been pointing toward, and the first held the position for 20 years until the retirement last year, and the 20 years of holding it were the years in which the identity was most fully formed, in which the job and the self were most thoroughly integrated, in which the question of who I was had the clearest and most available answer, which was the answer that the title provided, and that the people around me confirmed daily in the way that people confirm the identity of someone in a position of authority through the deference and the consultation and the specific quality of being needed that the position produced. I want to tell you about what the work actually was, because the accounting and the CFO title could give a misleading impression of the thing, could suggest the work was primarily technical and primarily interior, a man alone with the numbers, and it was never that, was from the beginning and increasingly across the 45 years a profoundly relational thing. The work of a person who was in genuine and daily engagement with the people of the organization, who understood the numbers as the language for describing what the people were doing, and what the operation required, and what the future was likely to contain, and who was valued not only for the precision of the technical work, but for the quality of the judgment and the relationship that the precision was in service of. I knew the people. Across 45 years of the same organization I had known, in the genuine sense of having worked alongside and depended on and been depended on by hundreds of people, and the knowing was cumulative and was real and was one of the primary goods of the 45 years. The specific satisfaction of being in a place long enough that the place knows you and you know the place in the full and particular way that only time produces, the way that distinguishes the genuine knowing from the efficient familiarity that shorter tenures allow. My wife is named Patricia, and we have been married for 43 years, and she retired 3 years before I did from her career as a hospital administrator, and her retirement is relevant to the story I am telling, because the observation of her retirement across those 3 years was the primary data I had for what my own retirement was going to be like, and the data was, in retrospect, significantly misleading, not because Patricia's experience was not genuine, but because her experience was hers and was organized around who she is and what the work was for her. And my experience has been organized around who I am and what the work was for me, and the two are not the same. Patricia's retirement was, within a few months, something she inhabited with a completeness and an ease that I found, from the outside of it while I was still working, both admirable and somewhat reassuring. The evidence that the transition was navigable and that the life on the other side of the work was available and full, and not the diminishment that the prospect of it had sometimes felt like from inside the work. She found the rhythms of the retired life with the specific competence she brought to most things, and she organized the days around the things she valued, the grandchildren and the gardening and the reading and the friendships that the work schedule had always been crowding against, and the days she organized looked, from my observation of them across 3 years, like a good life, a genuinely good life. I retired in January of last year with the expectation, which I had assembled from the observation of Patricia's experience and from the general understanding that competent people bring competence to the management of the transitions in their lives, that the retirement was going to be navigable, and that the navigation was going to be primarily a practical matter. The reorganization of the schedule and the redirection of the energy and the competence I had applied to the work toward the things the work had been crowding against, which were similar in their nature, if not in their specific form, to the things that Patricia had found on the other side of her transition. The first morning I was wrong. I want to tell you about the first morning, because the first morning is the beginning of the honest account, and because the honest account requires the specific rather than the general. I woke at the usual time, which was 6:15, because the body that has been waking at 6:15 for 45 years does not immediately understand that the reason for the 6:15 is no longer present, and I lay in bed for a few minutes in the specific condition of someone who has woken at the usual time for the usual purpose, and who is discovering in the lying there that the usual purpose is not waiting for them. This is not a dramatic discovery. I want to say that clearly because the description of it could be given a drama that the experience did not have. was not the crisis of the sudden abyss, but the quiet and somewhat bewildering recognition of the first morning of a different kind of day. The first morning of the kind of day that did not have the structure that 45 years of mornings had had. I got up and made coffee and sat at the kitchen table and tried to understand what I was supposed to do next, which is a question that the 45 years of the work had never left me with in quite this form, because the next had always been available, had always been the meeting or the call or the report or the decision that the day's structure was organizing itself around. And the absence of the next was the first concrete form in which the retirement presented itself as something different from what I had been expecting, which was simply the work's absence rather than the absence of the self that the work had been organizing. I want to explain that distinction because it is the central thing I have been living inside for 8 months, and the thing I most want to try to give you clearly. And it is a distinction that I did not have the words for on the first morning, and that I am still finding the words for now, which is why the finding is part of the telling rather than the prerequisite for it. The work's absence I had anticipated. I knew the work would not be there, and I had thought about the work's absence, and I had planned, in the way that a competent person plans for a known transition, the things that would be there instead, the grandchildren and the travel, and the projects around the house, and the reading I had not had time for, and the golf that I had played infrequently, and that I was going to play more regularly. And the planning was reasonable, and was not wrong exactly. Those things are there, and they are genuine goods. But the planning had been organized around the assumption that the self that the work had been organizing was a self that existed independently of the organizing. That was simply being channeled by the work in the way that a river is channeled by its banks, and that would, when the banks were removed, simply flow in the direction of the other available channels. The banks are not merely the channel. That is what the 8 months have taught me, slowly and sometimes painfully, and with the specific quality of a lesson that is teaching itself through the experience, rather than through the understanding, which is the way the most important lessons tend to teach themselves. The banks are part of what the river is, part of what gives it its form and its direction and its quality. And when the banks are removed, the river does not simply flow in the other available channels. It spreads. It becomes something different from the river it was, something that requires new banks, or a different relationship with the landscape, or a period of the spreading itself in which the self is finding out what it is without the structure that gave it its form. I am in the spreading. I want to be honest about that, because the accounts of retirement that are given from the inside of the first year tend toward one of two versions: the version in which the transition is declared a success and the new life is presented as the full and adequate replacement for the old, and the version in which the transition is presented as the crisis and the loss and the disorientation that has not yet resolved. And I am offering you the second version, not because I am in crisis. I am not in crisis, but because the second version is the honest one, and the honest one is the only version worth the telling. What I have found in the spreading, which is the thing I want to most tell you, is a set of questions about the work, and what the work was that I was not able to ask from inside the work, and that the spreading has made available. The questions that the structure of the work was both providing and preventing, providing the answers by organizing the days, and preventing the questions by filling the space in which the questions would otherwise arise. The first question is what the work was for. I want to tell you about this question because it has been the most surprising and the most productive of the questions the spreading has produced, the one that I expected to have the easiest answer, and that has turned out to have the most complicated one. I thought I knew what the work was for. The work was for the company, for the making of the operation function well and sustainably across the decades of my involvement with it, and it was for the family, for the income and the structure that 45 years of stable employment provided to the life Patricia and I built, and to the raising of our 2 sons. And it was for me, for the expression of the specific quality of mind and judgment that the CFO work required and that I had, and the satisfaction that the expression of genuine capability in genuine service of a genuine purpose provides. These were real things, and I am not revising them from the distance of 8 months into the account. That says the work was not what I thought it was, because the work was what I thought it was, and the things I have named were genuinely what the work was for. But the spreading has shown me that there was something the work was for that I did not include in the accounting because I did not know it was there. The way you do not see the water you are in until you are out of it. And the something is the specific and daily and largely invisible function of organizing the self, of providing the structure within which the question of who I am had a clear and available answer that did not require the asking. The work was answering a question I did not know I was asking. That is the most honest way I can say it, and it is the thing that the 8 months of the retirement have shown me with a clarity that the 45 years of the work could not have shown, because the work was providing the answer rather than revealing the question. Every morning for 45 years, I woke at 6:15 with the question of who I am already answered by the structure waiting for me. The structure that said, "You are the CFO of this company. You are needed here. These are the decisions that require your judgment. These are the people who depend on your understanding of the numbers in the operation, and the answering of the question in this form, daily and consistently, and across 45 years, meant that the question itself was never visible to me, was always already answered before I had the occasion to notice it was being asked. Now the question is visible. Now it is asking itself every morning in the 6:15 silence of the kitchen with the coffee and the absence of the structure. And the visibility of it is disorienting in a way I had not expected and was not prepared for. And the disorientation is not the crisis, but it is real. And it is the thing I most want to tell you about, because I think it is the thing that is least often told honestly in the accounts of retirement. The thing that the competent and the accomplished and the people for whom the work was genuinely good and genuinely theirs tend to manage into a less vulnerable form than the one I am offering you. My son Michael, who is 43 and who is a physician and who has the specific quality of his mother's practicality, combined with something of my tendency to think about things at some length, asked me in the 3rd month of the retirement whether I was happy, and I told him I was fine, which was the managed form of the answer that was true as far as it went, and that did not include the question that the fine was managing around, which was the question I have been trying to describe. He looked at me in the way that people who know you well look at you when the answer you have given is the managed form rather than the honest one, and he did not push it, which I was grateful for at the time, and less grateful for now, because the pushing might have produced the honest account earlier, and the honest account, I have found, is the more productive thing to be in the managed form. I told Patricia in the 5th month. The telling was not a planned conversation, but the arrival of the honest account after several months of the managed one. The kind of arrival that happens when the managed form has become more effortful than the honest one, which is the natural progression of the managed form when it is managing something real rather than something small. I told her that I did not know who I was without the work, and that the not knowing was more significant and more disorienting than I had expected, and that the activities I had planned to fill the retirement were genuine and were good and were not filling the specific thing that was empty, a thing that the work had been filling without my knowing it was filling it. She was quiet for a moment, and then she said that she had known something was in the sitting, which is the phrase she uses for the interior processing that I do when I am managing rather than telling. And she said she had been waiting for me to arrive at the telling, because she had learned across 43 years that the waiting was more productive than the asking when it came to the specific kind of thing I was managing. And the waiting was its own form of the knowing me, the long and patient and accurate knowing that 43 years of genuine marriage produces. She told me something that I have been thinking about since the telling, which is that she thought the question of who I am without the work was not the problem the disorientation was presenting it as, but the opportunity the disorientation was producing. The first real occasion in 45 years that the question had been asked rather than answered in advance by the structure, and that the occasion was valuable precisely because the question was genuinely open and that a genuinely open question, lived inside honestly rather than managed into the closed form, was the condition for finding the answer that was actually mine rather than the one the structure had been providing. I have been thinking about what she said across the 3 months since the telling, living inside the question in the way she suggested, which is harder than it sounds and is the productive form of the spreading if you can resist the closing of the question into one of the available answers before the genuine answer has had time to form. The available answers are the ones the culture provides for the question of who a retired person is. The grandfather and the gardener and the traveler and the volunteer and the golfer and the various other forms that retired identity takes in the accounts that the culture offers. And the available answers are not wrong. Those things are real and are good, but they are the available answers, and the available answers are not always the genuine ones. And the resistance of the available answers in favor of the open question is the harder and more productive form of the living inside the disorientation. What I have found in the living inside the open question, slowly and without the confidence that the precision of the accounting work always provided, is something about the work and what it was that I did not fully understand from the inside of the doing it. The work was, at its core and beneath the accounting and the CFO title and the technical precision that the outside of it presented, a practice of care. I want to say that and to stay with it because it is not the description I would have given of the work from inside the doing of it. Would not have been the first or probably the 5th word I would have reached for if asked to describe the 45 years. But it is the word the 8 months of the spreading have produced as the most honest description of what the work actually was and what the retirement has actually removed. I cared about the people and the operation, not in the abstract or the professional sense, but in the genuine and specific and daily sense of someone who has been in one place long enough to understand what the place requires and who has, in the understanding, developed a quality of investment in the thing's well-being that is not separable from the self, that is part of what the self is, rather than a professional obligation the self has taken on. The caring was the work, more than the accounting and the judgment and the precision, and the accounting and the judgment and the precision were in the service of the caring rather than the other way around. And I did not fully know this from the inside of the doing it, and I am knowing it now from the outside, in the specific and instructive form of the thing that is most missing from the daily texture of the retired life. What I most miss is not the work exactly. It is the caring the work organized, the specific and daily practice of caring about something larger than the self, something that requires the self's best attention and judgment and commitment, and that receives that attention and is affected by it, and that provides, in the affecting of it, the experience of genuine consequence, of being the kind of person whose presence makes a difference to something beyond the self. And the experience of genuine consequence is, I understand at 71 in the 8 months of the spreading, one of the most fundamental needs of the self, and the work was meeting that need for 45 years without my knowing the need was being met, because the meeting was so consistent and so daily that it had the quality of the water, the quality of the thing that is everywhere and therefore invisible. I am looking for what I am going to care about now. I want to say that in the direct form rather than the managed form, because the direct form is the honest one, and the honest one is what this telling has been, from the beginning, trying to be. I am 71 years old, and I am in the spreading, and I am looking, with the open question and the resistance of the available answers, and the genuine patience that Patricia has been modeling across 3 years of her own retired life, for the thing that will organize the caring in the way the work organized it, the thing that is larger than the self, and that requires the self's best attention, and that provides the experience of genuine consequence that the self has, always needed, and that the work was providing, and that the retirement has made visible in its absence. I want to tell you something about what I have found so far, because the 8 months of the spreading have not been only the disorientation and the open question, have also been the accumulation of the small and tentative findings that the genuine looking produces when it is looking honestly rather than toward the available answers. I have found that I am more present with the grandchildren than I was in the years of the work, not only more available in the practical sense, but more genuinely present, more fully attending to what they are and what they are doing, and what the attending to them produces in me, which is the specific and unrepeatable delight of being in the presence of young people who are in the earliest stages of becoming themselves and who have not yet accumulated the protection that the becoming eventually produces. And the delight is real and is genuine and is, I am beginning to understand, one of the forms the caring takes when it is not organized by the work. One of the ways the self that the work was organizing is expressing the care that the work was the primary vehicle for. I have found that the reading I am doing in the retirement is different from the reading I did in the years of the work, which was mostly the reading of things relevant to the work, and therefore organized by the work's purposes rather than the interior's interests. And the reading organized by the interior's interests is producing, slowly and without the efficiency that the work produced most things, a quality of interior development that is different from anything the work was producing, the development of a person who is finding out, for the first time with genuine freedom and genuine time, what the interior is actually interested in when the work's purposes are not organizing the interest. I am volunteering with a financial literacy program for young people in the city, which is the closest available thing to the caring organized by the accounting that the work provided. And the volunteering is giving me something real, and I am not certain it is giving me what I most need, and I am trying to be honest with myself about the uncertainty rather than accepting the available answer of the volunteer as the substitute for the genuine finding. I want to say something directly to you if you are approaching the retirement or inside it, or if you are someone who has built an identity out of work that is genuine and real, and that is or will someday be ending, because I think what I have to say is useful, and because I think it is said less often and less honestly than it deserves. The identity you built out of the work is real. I want to start there because the dominant narrative about work identity, the one that says the person who has lost themselves in the work has been living the wrong life, and that the retirement is the liberation from the wrong life, is not always the accurate narrative and was not accurate for me. And the inaccuracy of it produces, in people for whom the work was genuinely theirs and genuinely good, the specific and unhelpful pressure to pretend that the liberation narrative is the one they are living when it is not. If the work was genuinely yours and genuinely good, the ending of it is a genuine loss, and the loss deserves to be acknowledged as a loss rather than managed into the liberation narrative, because the acknowledgement of the loss is the beginning of the honest engagement with what the loss has revealed, which is the question the work was answering without your knowing it was being asked. The question is the opportunity. This is what Patricia said, and what I have found to be more true than I was able to believe when she said it. And I am offering it to you with the caveat that it is more true than it is easy. And the not easy is the part that deserves the honest accounting. The genuine and open question of who you are without the work is the first real occasion, for many of us, that the question has been asked rather than answered in advance. And the occasion is valuable and is genuinely available to you, precisely in the period of the disorientation that you might be managing around. And the managing around it is the less productive form of the living inside the retirement, and the living inside the disorientation with the open question and the resistance of the available answers is the harder and more productive form. What you are looking for is the thing the work was actually doing, the thing beneath the title and the function and the professional identity that the work was providing. And the finding of that thing requires the honest accounting of what the work was at its core, rather than at its surface. And the honest accounting is the thing the spreading makes possible that the doing of the work was making invisible. I am 71 years old, and I am in the spreading, and I do not yet know who I am without the work. And I am telling you that honestly, because the honest telling is the thing I most have to offer from here. From 8 months inside the question, from the first sustained period of my adult life, in which the question of who I am has been genuinely open rather than answered in advance by the structure. The structure is gone, and the question is open, and the opening is hard, and is real, and is. I am beginning to believe in the way that you believe things that you are still in the process of learning. The most important thing that has happened to me in a very long time. The first real occasion in 45 years for the self to find out what it is when the banks are removed and the river spreads, and the finding takes the form of the honest living inside the question rather than the reaching for the nearest available answer. I am looking. The looking is the work now. And the work, it turns out, is still mine.